Hello and welcome to the PowerPoint presentation on the position essay or the classical argumentative form. We'll start with the opening, which is presenting the issue. Generally, I tell students to use some sort of an attention grabber. The best one would be an anecdote or some sort of narrative hook, which might have some pathos or emotional appeal to draw the audience into the essay. Maybe you find a case study or something that would relate to the topic as well. Other times you might see a quote or something along those lines used, something interesting perhaps, to pull the audience into the essay. If it's well known, you don't have to go into too much detail. However, if you have something more complicated, maybe you're looking at stem cell research or human cloning, you might need to define terms, look at why it's controversial, so forth and so on, or use some expository strategies. The key to a position essay is to do just that. Take a position, asserting your position. So you want to make sure that you say, hey, you're for it or you're against it, and then forecast some of the reasons as to why you're for it or why you are against it. So I am against capital punishment because it does not deter crime, it's handed out disproportionately to minorities, and sometimes innocent people are put to death. And then you can use that to unify the rest of your essay as you're building your argument throughout the paper. So throughout the paper, you'll repeat, you're for it or against it as well. So one of the main problems I see with students is that sometimes they don't really show a strong position on one side or the other. They might be looking at each side nicely, but not necessarily looking at one side over the other. So asserting a position is key. Different things you'll bring in to support. Facts is where you would start. Before the era of fake news, I thought facts were pretty standard, objective. A simple Google search could prove, hey, this is to be true. It's become a little more murky now, but it isn't really. A fact is a fact, and scientifically proven facts are fairly obvious, so we should be able to stick to facts for the most part. Each side should have some decent facts, I would imagine, which is why it's a complex, controversial issue to begin with. Statistics, well, that comes down to who's collecting the statistics. And we look at inductive reasoning, we'll see that, in a lot of cases, how the information is being gathered, by whom it's being gathered, how they're wording the question, all of that can come into play. So with statistics, if a large body of the scientific field is on your side, you probably want to use it, but you don't want too many numbers and too many statistics throughout. It's going to really suffocate your narrative tone for starters. So yes, use them here or there. If you're looking at climate change, 97% of climate scientists are all on the same page that it's happening and human beings are making it worse. That is colossal to have that many scholars agree on anything. So you definitely would go with it. So in those types of situations, you certainly would want to go with it. Examples, anecdotes. Well, these illustrations, I think a lot of times are used for pathos, and pathos or that emotional appeal is important. People vote more on pathos than on logos or logic. So if you can convince people to get passionate about something, even if it's completely illogical, you will get people to side with you. So we still want to put together logical essays, trust me, in academia. But knowing when to use pathos is certainly a great strategy to get that emotional appeal. And I think a lot of the anecdotes and examples and illustrations you bring in do that as much as anything. And then you bring in logos to support it. Expert testimony. Definitely you're going to be using expert testimony. Crazy Carl the blogger, not so expert. So, stick to, fields, schools, Harvard, Yale, stuff like that, studies by doctors, people that are actually experts in the area would be the best bet. Different types of sources they'll talk about will be primary, secondary, and tertiary. You're not going to find that many primary sources. Somebody wrote a book on it who actually spent his whole life doing it would be a primary source. And you might find that sometimes more your sources are going to be secondary or tertiary, which isn't a huge deal as long as they've done their research and so forth. But sometimes they haven't, and that can be a problem. So one way I explain it to students, and I know it couldn't really happen, but the primary would be the guy who studies the volcano and actually takes a ladle to the volcano and has looked at the volcano up close and can write everything about it. Secondary, he's not so brave as to go directly to the volcano, but he's spent most of his time studying these things and knows a lot about it. And the tertiary doesn't really know anything outside of he happens to be interested in it for this particular time, a journalist or something like that. So he researches it a little bit, which isn't a terrible thing as long as he's done his research well. So a lot of the sources we end up with are tertiary, on the outside kind of looking in. The only issue is, of course, we're going to a lot of times see some slant in those situations. But if they're doing their research, it's not a huge deal. They usually do back things up with evidence. Comparisons, well, they're neat. They can be clever. They can sometimes be persuasive, but no two things are exactly the same. So you're going to run into some problems because of that. They're similar in 1, 2, 3 ways, but they're different in that fourth way. And your opposition is going to point at that fourth way to try to knock apart your argument. So I think they complement things more than anything else. But I brought in the example of the war on drugs to show you how this works. Drug use is a matter of behavior control. It's like overeating or gambling. It would be ridiculous to declare war on overeating, so it's ridiculous to declare war on drugs. Or the other side, the war on drugs is like any war. We will not begin to win it until we begin to shoot drug dealers on sight. So you can see that you could take the comparison and go either direction with it. Counter-arguing is a key part of all argumentative writing, and in the classic argument, certainly it's important. The first thing you see up there is to concede. Try not to do that. You might have to concede some minor points here or there. Too much concession, of course, is going to cause your argument to, playing Jenga, fall down. So you don't want that. You try to accommodate, if you can, which is to modify that argument in order to make sure it's fitting what you want. So some people might say it's argued one way. Nevertheless, here's how I see it, or here's what my evidence shows, or here's what my belief on the matter, and then bring in that evidence, bring in that critical support, essentially. So accommodation, I think, is key with counter-arguing. Sometimes you'll be able to see, hey, they're obviously, they have some, hasty generalizations. They have some circular reasoning. It's post hoc ergo propter hoc. You can point out various logical flaws. And if you can do that and show why they're wrong in that way, certainly you want to go ahead and do that to knock down your opposition's argument. Credibility can be in a lot of different ways. I think from grabbing attention at first is important, but certainly making sure you have decent sources. You keep that conversational tone. And I know in this day and age where we're very polarized in our opposite camps and everything seems to be very tribal, it's hard to do that. But you should be, having a conversational narrative tone throughout the essay where you might get passionate about the issue, but the tone is really pretty civil for the most part, trying to show that you are reasonable on your side. The better you research, the better off you're going to be. The more sources you have, the better off you're going to be. Ad hominem or attacking people isn't going to change anything. That's just going to cause people to kind of get into their opposite corners, so to speak. So you really want to make sure that you are looking at the issue, you're concerned about the issue, you bring in logic and reason and support on your side of the issue to help out. And that really does help bridge for common ground too, to show, hey, I understand your side. I understand why you feel how you feel. Here's how I feel and why I feel the way I do. And here's some logic to show that it makes sense to feel the way I do as well. So the basics, grab attention first. Like I said, that narrative hook is a good one. Other things could be done, as you see there as well. But do something to pull the audience into the essay. Within the thesis, you're going to make sure you're for or against it, and then forecast some of those reasons, which will help unify the essay, because you can use those reasons throughout to build the body of your essay. In the body of the essay, you're going to have those reasons and the support, and then you want to make sure you're bringing in facts, stats, examples, quotes, and so forth and so on. Make sure you have a counter argument, at least one of the areas, maybe a couple of the areas. Something else you can sometimes do in this sort of position paper, or the classical argument, if you will, is just take the opposition's points and then knock them down. Here's their first point, and here's some evidence to show it's wrong. Here's their second point, and here's some evidence to show it's wrong. Here's their third point, so forth and so on. But you don't have to do it that way. As long as you're bringing in a couple of their points and doing some accommodation and refutation, you should be fine. So in the conclusion, you want to make sure that you are restating that thesis on what side of the position you're on, and leaving some sort of an impression at the end. It could be wrapping up that anecdote, going back for that emotional appeal or something like that. It could be, some sort of thoughtful observation, call for action, a reflection, anything like that at the end. So I hope you have enjoyed the PowerPoint over the classical argument or the position essay. And I look forward to reading your papers down the road.